Why do I write epic fantasy? Well, that's a big question. There's actually two questions in it, and I'm going to be answering both of them in this episode. So stick around if you want to find out why I do what I do, why I write epic fantasy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Alex Shagir, and of course, I'm an epic fantasy writer, thus the title of this episode. Thank you for all your support so far, liking my videos, commenting, definitely subscribing. It is all very appreciated. I'm excited about this episode because I get to talk just a little bit about myself, so you get to learn a little bit more about me of why I choose to write epic fantasy. And again, there's two sort of questions into this. The first one is, why do I write epic fantasy? Why that genre? And the second question is, why do I write epic fantasy as opposed to just consuming it or watching movies or playing fantasy video games? Why write it? So I'm going to be tackling both of these questions. I'm going to be answering them so that you understand a little bit more about where I'm coming from, of why I write epic fantasy. So for the first question, why do I write epic fantasy? Why not sci-fi? Why not historical fiction? Why not? I'm an accountant. Why not some accounting help guide? Why epic fantasy? So this will probably be a long answer, but gives you some insight into my background. When I grew up, 90s kid. Well, I was born in 92, so 90s into the early thousands. There were two things that were big in my life, and I could have gone in either of these directions, I guess. I was raised in a household that very much enjoyed Star Wars. I remember seeing the new trilogy, the prequel trilogy, when I was a kid. So I must have been 7 when Episode 1 came out. So very young, loved it, loved every bit of Star Wars, watched it all the time, had Star Wars toys. With regards to other sci-fi stuff, there wasn't too much other sci-fi that I watched, like Star Trek. It was really mostly Star Wars, which again I loved. But then alongside that was also my fantasy stuff in life. So as a kid, even before Star Wars, the earliest kind of thing I remember getting into is the Dark Crystal. And I loved the Dark Crystal. It scared me at times, very much so at that young age, but I loved it. Loved the Dark Crystal. But then kind of coinciding with Star Wars, I remember my stepfather listening with me and my stepbrother cassette tapes of The Hobbit at night. And it was a dramatic reading. I forget which version of it was, but it was the late 90s it must have been. So whatever cassette tape and popular was out at that time. And I listened to that and loved it. The music, the sounds of the goblins and then the dwarves together and Bilbo and his adventure. And it just captured my attention right away. And it solidified it a couple years later when I was 9 years old watching The Fellowship of the Ring in theaters. And I remember after an over 3-hour movie at 9 years old and their credits started rolling, I just thought, like, it's over already. Why can't I watch more of it? So my love of fantasy, I think, was definitely just higher in the beginning than, say, the sci-fi genre. But one thing I think that was able to solidify it even more is, as a kid, for me, being able to act out my imagination more when it came to fantasy versus sci-fi. So yes, as a kid, I played, whatever you want to call it, spaceships and guns, we'll call it that, and you can imagine, being in a spaceship or using a lightsaber, all that stuff was fun. But there was something about being able to go outside, pick up a stick, get a knife, use a knife as a kid, of course, and sharpening it to make it look like a sword, and being able to maybe even find like a stick that looked like a bow, put a string to it and use a bow and arrow, going out back and walking in the woods and through the trees and in the forest, and being able to physically unsheath my wooden sword. And there's something about kind of living in that imagination and that fantasy world that I couldn't get with sci-fi. Yes, I could envision holding a toy branch that, a branch that looked like a gun maybe, and pretending to do it, but it didn't have that same feeling of being out there and just exploring nature anyway, and adding to that, imagining it being a fantastic world around me. So I think just maybe a general tendency toward the fantasy side of things over sci-fi, and coupled with that, being able to live it out. I remember when I was probably around 12, and I lived beside my cousin Jonathan growing up, and he and we would go out every day after school for a few months. We did this, and behind our grandparents' house, and we would make a wooden fort. And again, our parents let us use hammers, nails, saws, whatever we needed to do it to get us out of the house and have fun outside. And we built a fort with a tower you could climb up. We built a ladder into it. It was, I don't know how high it was as a kid. It was probably short, but it felt tall. And we climbed up in it. We built a walled, not fortress, a walled, like a castle thing, and with a wooden gate. And we made locks, and we made pass through the swampy spot in the back of the forest, and we made planks for walkways, and we crafted our own swords and bows, and they could shoot far. I'll tell you. And we made our own catapult that required two of us to run it. So just living that fantasy life. He loved Lord of the Rings too, and we loved fantasy stuff. And so I think just living that and having it part of my imagination is what really pushed me towards the fantasy side of things. And then as I got older, 12, 13, 14, 15, my dad introduced me to the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Probably read that too early. It's a very thick, dense book. But I was just handed to more fantasy was handed to me than sci-fi as well. I didn't read Dune until later in life, a few years ago. So I think all that kind of pushed me into the fantasy side of things. So for the question, why do I write epic fantasy compared to other genres? That's why. It's just a huge part of my life. Watching Lord of the Rings, growing up listening to the Hobbit cassette tapes, playing the Lord of the Rings video games, playing it outside. Just a huge part of my life. And also sharing all that with family, with my stepdad, with my dad, just all the people in my life that have introduced me to fantasy, just really kind of pointed me in that direction. The second question, why do I write epic fantasy? Why can't I just sit down, read the whole Wheel of Time series in a week, and just be content? Well, it has to do a lot with my personality. I have a hard time just having a casual hobby that I just enjoy and consume. Whether it's, for instance, when it comes to video games, I haven't played video games now in a long time, and it's due to first of all, I can get very addicted to it, and it's because whether it's single player or a multiplayer game. If it's a multiplayer game, I have to look up YouTube videos and Google strategies and end up being better and better and trying to become the best at it. Even though I know in my mind I will never be the best, I just want to try to be really good at it and perfect my skill with it. And if it comes down to a single player game, with playing on nightmare difficulty, looking at you, Dragon Age, probably beat that nightmare difficulty 3 times. But anywho, I have to play on the hardest difficulty. I have to die and die and die and replay a level that might take me 5 minutes if I was playing on the easiest difficulty, but it takes me an hour or two. So just so many things that propel me to, it kind of points me sadly in a direction of being addicted to the video game, and which just isn't healthy for my mental life. But on the flip side of that, that drive to just perfect myself at something is anytime I play a video game now, and it's happened for the past 6 or 7 years, every time I get into a video game, I can't help but think, man, I could make a video game. And I know I could, given enough time and training and learning and everything. And I've tried to do that before. And it's just an example to show that anything I pick up, I have to create with it. I can't just get into something, casually do it, and then put it down. I have to be the best at it. I have to be the best that I can be at it. Same thing with running. I've tried running before to get into shape, lose some weight, get healthy, and that never worked. But when I started to learn more about running and running forms and techniques and different endurance races and just starting into it, I thought, man, let me try this running thing out. And so now, nowhere near where I can be. I'm not saying I'm a fast runner, but I've been running for a while now and doing marathons, half marathons, and some 5Ks. And so whenever I pick up something, I have to take it so seriously, and I have to get into it. And I think it's the same thing with the writing. So even as a kid, when I was like 9 years old, after watching Lord of the Rings, I remember, wow, like I can write my own book now. And so I would sit down, I just write these horrible stories. I know they were. Uh, all praise to my dad for saying how great they were. He told me a few years ago, he said, "Man, those stories were awful, but I know I had to keep you going." And so, yeah, I think it's just part of it is a personality side that definitely has the drive for me to create things rather than just consume. But then on the other side of that is, I think I have so many stories in a world that I want to share with everyone. And I want people to be able to read the characters, stories, and worlds that I have in my mind and be able to talk about it with me and just share that experience together. So there's two aspects of it: the personality aspect of me, just the drive to create, to do, to be the best I can be. But then on the other side of that, I just think I have some really good stories and worlds and just an epic fantasy life that I want to be able to share with everyone and enjoy with everyone, with my family, my kids, my friends, and anyone who will read it. So that's the why I write epic fantasy rather than just, again, having a Robert Jordan marathon week in and week out. So that's why I write epic fantasy. I write epic fantasy because it's what I grew up loving as a kid and fell in love with, and that's why I write it, is because I like to create stories, worlds, and characters that I've fallen in love with, and I hope you will too one day. Thank you for watching. Appreciate your time and your support. It matters to me a great deal. Thank you for liking this video and subscribing and just being involved with my writing process, and I can't wait to share my writing with you.